Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as we've been talking about all day, affordable housing is one of the most pressing issues facing the country, and I am honored to be joined by Senators Blunt Rochester and Todd Young to discuss their housing policy priorities and the current environment in Congress. So, from restrictive zoning to limited funding to preservation challenges, I feel like there's a lot to talk about and sort of the federal policy role there. So I'd like to start on just kind of affordable housing more broadly. Senator Blunt Rochester, you sort of made this an issue in your campaign, and I'm wondering if you could kind of illuminate for us the biggest concerns your constituents had, maybe the top two concerns.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here with my fellow senator. I know that it is the afternoon, and so I just want to make sure people are still awake, and that I think there's a thing called housers. Are there any housers in the house? Okay, we have some energy. And I think that's the exciting thing about this issue, is that right now, I don't care where I go in my state, up and down the state of Delaware, we are urban, suburban, rural, and coastal, people are talking about housing. When I meet with young people who are graduating from college and they're thinking about what is next for them, they're talking about the lack of affordable housing and the fact that they might still end up living with their parents. Seniors who maybe have to transition out of the homes that they're in or downsize are talking about housing and affordable housing, and our business community is talking about it. We built a hospital in one area, but folks can't afford to live near the hospital, so therefore they can't work there. And so it has such ramifications, including for our children. If they are unhoused, how do we expect them to learn? How do we expect them to be healthy? And so it was the number one issue that I heard about up and down my state. And the two areas were availability and affordability. And from the availability perspective, it didn't even matter. We have not enough houses for individuals at the lowest income levels and the highest income levels. There just aren't houses. And I'll just end with an anecdote. I went to a manufacturing plant, and the CEO invited his COO to come into the office, and he asked her to tell me how old she was. I thought that was rude, but she told me. She said, "I'm 51." And he said, "Tell the then Congresswoman where you live." And she said, "I live with my dad." That, to me, typified the fact that we've got 8 million units short or thereabouts in this country, and it's affecting everyone. So that's why I'm excited about it. That's why I'm excited to be partnering with my Republican colleagues on it, because housing is vital to everybody.
Thank you. Senator Young, you have been a strong voice for bipartisan collaboration in Congress, and I'm wondering kind of what has made housing sort of put it at the top of your agenda during your 8 years in the Senate?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. It's really the same reason I'm glad you're holding this panel and creating a forum in which we can talk about housing today. And, in the great spirit of the Bipartisan Policy Center, my story is very, very similar to Lisa's story. I happen to be a Republican. She happens to be a Democrat. Our states are different in different ways. But on this issue, my constituents insisted that I focus on housing. In fact, when I first campaigned for the U.S. Senate, it was in the 2016 timeframe, I told audiences repeatedly that I was going to come to Washington on their behalf and work on things that made a difference to their daily lives. And I didn't expect to hear about housing. But in rural communities and urban communities alike, north, south, east, west of my state, I heard about housing challenges. And so I resolved in my early months of serving as their senator to go around the state, and I established an agenda called my Fair Shot Agenda. The number one issue in these roundtables I held was housing affordability. And I think it's a really important issue for all of us in the Senate to lead on, because it requires leadership. It requires making some difficult arguments, maybe, to our political bases. On the Democratic side, this is now sort of commonly called abundance progressivism or liberalism, where you need more stuff. If you want more renewable energies, you're going to have to permit for renewable energies. If you need more housing, you're going to have to permit and maybe ask people to get outside their comfort zones on zoning policy. On the Republican side, it's the demand side that can be a difficult argument. We need Republicans to understand that for decades we've been, through public-private partnerships, investing in people's ability to occupy nice homes so that they can work in those places that we insist they work on in order to become an active part of the community. So it's an interesting issue, but interest in this issue transcends political identity and geographical location, and so I think that's why it's sort of ready-made for bipartisan collaboration.
I think one thing everyone in Washington can agree on, or certainly everyone in this room can agree on, and most of Washington can agree on, is the need to reduce local regulatory barriers like restrictive zoning and land use policies that drive up the cost of construction. And Senator Blunt Rochester, your Housing Supply Frameworks Act, the first bill you introduced in Congress, aims to help states and localities tackle that issue. And so I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about the bill and kind of where it's headed?
Yeah. Well, as you said, this was, I really was conscious about, as a new senator, what would be my first piece of legislation that I lead? What would be that first bill? And I like jobs in the economy. I was Secretary of Labor. I always say if I had another middle name, it'd be Lisa Blunt Jobs Rochester. But housing was just so pivotal. And so this bill, our framework bill, is one that would really have HUD provide frameworks for state and local governments to work in partnership to really revitalize, reimagine, and rehaul zoning in different states, cut red tape, try to, again, grow the ability of more housing stock. And the last time that our country did a framework bill like this was actually the 1920s. Things have changed a lot since the 1920s. And so even as we look at how do we provide templates, how do we give the tools to those local areas, we have to think about rules that maybe were put in place or regulations that were put in place that don't necessarily apply everywhere. Maybe you don't need a parking spot to go with your housing unit. Or maybe you have, you want to build out the middle. We have a lot of single-family homes. We might have high-rises, but we don't have enough duplexes and multiplexes. And so our goal was to give local governments the tools to be able to do this. And I'm excited that it's bipartisan. And it's I'm teasing out, I like that fair shot. I like that. We're doing a housing agenda that will be coming out as well soon. So I'm just teasing that. Do not report it out, okay?
I'll keep that to myself.
It's a teaser.
So another bipartisan bill that has broad support, Senator Young, is your Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. This would increase the low-income...
You can clap. That's okay.
Your bill would strengthen the low-income housing tax credit, which, as everyone here knows, is sort of the most effective tool Washington has to goose the production of affordable housing. And I'm wondering, so what parts of your bill, if you could kind of walk us through, what parts of your bill made it into the House package, and then the prognosis in the Senate as reconciliation unfolds?
Yeah, well, thank you. So, as a refresher, and I don't know that this audience really needs one, but some of you, it may be helpful. So when we did the 2017 tax reform, we lowered the rates, and when you lower the rates, each of your credits is worth less, and we didn't account for that. So at a time when so many Americans are housing constrained, we thought it was, myself and Senator Cantwell thought it was very important that we plus up the generosity of those credits so that we would be building more houses in that affordable range as opposed to fewer. So among the things, and I've got them in my pocket here because this is a moving target that we're able to get into this legislation, is we were able to plus up the value of the credits. Our language is roughly similar. We also decreased or increased the allowance that you can use through bond financing for affordable housing using the LIHTC, and we gave the per state allocation. We increased the percentage of per state allocations of these LIHTC credits as well. So they're cosmetic, at least on the margin substantive, especially if you're impacted differences between the House and the Senate versions. There's, at least so far, not inclusion for tribal areas, and so those dialogues are ongoing. And then we also, in my view, could require some stronger language on rural communities and their allocations in the Senate package. But this is an evolving work product, and we're not done yet. And with your continued advocacy, we can make those LIHTC provisions even more generous.
Thank you. Senator Blunt Rochester, you have spoken a lot about rising property insurance costs, which are hitting everyone, not just coastal areas, but pretty much across the country. And I'm wondering, what bipartisan policy proposals do you think have some legs for relief on that front?
That's a tough question for a freshman, so Todd, be ready to help out on this one, especially a freshman in the Senate. I've spoken about it because we know it is something that is leading to a crisis level. And I've spoken about it as well in our committee on banking, housing, and urban affairs. And the positive news is that on both sides of the aisle, there is a recognition that this is a problem. But I also think that when you look at things like flood insurance, we've been talking about this for many years. I was trying to find out how many times have we extended that without having a real conversation about how do we reform, right? I think about the fact that as coming from a state that's coastal, we know we're the lowest mean elevation state in the country. So we're very much concerned about people not being able to afford their insurance and being priced out of homes, period. That's just going to contribute to the housing crisis that we have. And so the things that maybe give me some hope is, again, the work of this organization. There's a whole section about focusing on data and transparency. I think that's important. I think looking at incentives to make sure that people aren't building in places where they shouldn't be building right now, but also mitigating the risks, the effects of climate. So something like the SURE Act, which we passed and which I led on in the House, really looks at those things that we can do to deal with some of the impacts of climate that are impacting these insurance costs going sky high. And so I think those are the things we need to be focused on together. But I'm going to turn it over to the more senior senator, to see if there's any actual things.
Well, I mean, just an observation. I'm not on that committee of jurisdiction, but with that said, you know, I'm a bit sympathetic as I think about maybe a generation or two ago, the legislators, they had somewhat limited information. As did the members, the leaders of housing finance entities at the federal level, limited information about what sort of risks might occur. To use flooding as a great example, what are the risks of a flood occurring in a particular geography? To what extent Will that impact our local community? How should that factor mathematically into financing costs and all the rest? We now have the ability, with a very high level of precision, to predict these things, to measure the costs, and then we can have an informed conversation about how to socialize any of the costs that we might decide, informed by our values, to socialize. So we've limited the subjectivity of this policy issue, which I think lends itself a lot more to people like Lisa and I coming to terms, rather than subjectivity and political philosophy and politics filling the void. So this is where organizations like BPC and the Terwilliger Center and our other stakeholders can weigh in, and we can revisit some of these important things. So, and frankly, we need to. We need to. This needs to be an oversight role of Congress. We need to force change to be effected, and this may end up, ideally, this would help us manage more risk at the homeowner level and incentivize more people into homes if we can get this right.
Back to the data, too, starting
Completely.
with the data.
That's definitely interesting. I wanted to ask you also about your bill, the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. As we know, community development and revitalization are important issues everywhere, and that seems like something, especially in rural areas and small towns, that your bill would sort of help. And what are kind of the biggest barriers to preserving and producing, or revitalizing, I should say, affordable homes in those communities?
Well, there's a value gap between, let me tell you, just lay the groundwork here in 30 seconds about how I came to this issue. I love old homes. I think they're charming. I think it's important in our country, which values the market, and we harness market forces to preserve certain things, our sense of place and communities and even beauty. And it's my hope when I go through some of our communities, go through Gary, Indiana, or East Chicago, Indiana, as an example. There are a lot of homes that have fallen into great disrepair, but you can tell 30, 40, 50 years ago, they were magnificent structures. And so how can you create a market incentive to acquire these homes, to fix these homes up, and then allow whomever might have improved these homes to flip them on the market, or incentivize some of the owner-occupants of these homes so that you're not squeezing existing residents out of a community to, over a period of time, get the capital to fix up their own homes and then improve the value of them. And oh, by the way, everyone benefits in the end because you increase the assessed value of these communities, and that helps with local services. So the answer seems to be in fixing that value gap between the cost of acquisition plus repair and modernization with the cost of sale. The numbers have never really worked. So we create a tax credit to fill that gap. And we do so in designated areas around the country. They would be designated in a way familiar to those who have navigated the Opportunity Zone program, so designated at a state level. And so that's how I came to this issue. That's how it would work. And this, too, has been broadly popular as I travel the state. It's broadly bipartisan. And though it's not part of this current reconciliation package, I regard this as maybe, along with some of Lisa's efforts, the next wave of our housing affordability efforts.
Another sort of personal question. You've both had the distinction of serving in both the House and the Senate. So first, I want you to tell us which one is better, and then why you made the leap and kind of how it's changed your approach to legislating, if it has.
I mean, you know what LBJ said about the different chambers, right? LBJ said that if the House is chicken, shh, and the Senate is chicken salad, all right? So, no offense intended, but that was LBJ, just saying. Listen, I think it's really challenging, especially in today's day and age, to be a really good member of the U.S. House. It's especially challenging because every 2 years they're up for re-election, meaning if you try and do something that's politically courageous, which I believe is required from time to time in these offices, otherwise you can't do them well, but it makes it all the harder to finesse making hard decisions during a time like this. It is important, however, just for the sake of relationships, I think, to have served in the other chamber, because if you haven't served in Congress before, you'll discover in short order, it's one thing to get a bill through the entire Senate process, and that feels great until you realize it also has to find its way through the House. So for those of us who sort of get this whole process and members of our staff, you really need to be working parallel tracks, both chambers at the same time, developing those relationships in a meaningful way so that you can actually deliver bills to the president's desk. And so that's my answer, but after quoting LBJ, I do want to contextualize that comment, how hard it is to be in the House, and I feel for a lot of these members.
Wow, I still have the chicken thing in my head, and maybe
LBJ does that to you.
But then again, I come from Delaware, so there are 241 chickens to every person, so chicken is like big for us. But I think the House, the Senate, first of all, I think we would agree. I loved my colleagues in the House. It can be hard. It can be fun. It's a lot of energy. But also, I do think that focus on constantly running, as soon as you get elected, you're running again. And I think that does make it hard sometimes to really get deep. That's the part I like about the Senate. I feel like in a shorter amount of time, I've been able to build great relationships because it's a smaller place as well, so it's less people. It's easier to get to know people. I also feel like in the Senate, because it is smaller and because of even the rules, you are not only encouraged, but if you want to succeed, you have to act and work in a bipartisan way. So I think it's set up that way. But I also recognize the times that we are in are challenging. Even as I'm a newer member, I watch members who have been there for a while struggle with the environment that we're in and the relationships they already have had with people. And so it is a challenging time, which is why this work is so important, to find the things that we can work together on and to keep in mind why we do this. We didn't do it to get elected. We did it for that kid that's unhoused. We did it for that couple that just got married and is trying to figure out how to get their first home or build generational wealth, or that senior who wants to live in a safe place. So when we go back to the why, we're going to be all right in the names of, Kendrick Lamar. We're going to be all right. That was Kendrick Lamar, wasn't it? I think that was Kendrick Lamar. We're going to be all right, but we got to do it together. We got to stick together.
LBJ.
You didn't expect that, did you? LBJ to Kendrick Lamar. Okay.
It's a good transition. So we have a 2-0 sweep for the Senate, it seems like, but no surprises there given where you both work. So actually, we're running out of time, and this is sort of all the time we have this afternoon. But please join me in thanking Senators Lisa Blunt Rochester and Todd Young
Thank you.
for taking the time.
Thank you.
Frater, Chairman of Vessel Technologies and a board member of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Before we conclude our time with the senators, I'm honored to recognize them as recipients of this year's Terwilliger Bipartisanship in Housing Award. As we've seen in today's discussion, Senators Lisa Blunt Housing Rochester, and Todd Young, lead efforts to work across the aisle and advance solutions to our nation's housing challenges. We've just heard from the senators about their housing priorities, but I want to take a moment to thank them for spearheading key bipartisan bills. Thank you, Senator Blunt Housing Rochester, for your leadership on the Housing Supply Frameworks Act, which would support state and local governments to develop pro-housing zoning and land use policies. And thank you, Senator Young, for your commitment to boosting housing supply through your work on the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act and the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. Senator Young is the first two-time winner of the Terwilliger Bipartisanship in Housing Award. At this rate, and if I may say in these times, we might have to create a Hall of Fame just for him. Both senators have shown a strong commitment to reaching across the aisle to address the housing affordability crisis. Please join me in congratulating Senator Blunt Rochester and Senator Young.